People always say I'm very disciplined with like my training and stuff like that, but it's not discipline, it's easy. I just do it. It's because it's who I am. I personally don't believe in discipline. I don't actually believe in forcing yourself to do something against your will, because that to me says that you're not connected to the vision enough. Because when you connect to something so deeply, it's like you already have it, you already are it. It's just that reality hasn't caught up with you yet. What's up guys, welcome to the video today. In this one I'm just going to be sharing a few different observations and realizations that I've come to in my own life and training, kind of over time, looking back in hindsight, but definitely more recently where things have started to come together and make much more sense. So as the title of the video suggests, this is something that I've spoken about in quite a few different videos, and it's this topic of essentially raising your standards, like having a much higher expectation upon yourself. People always want tactics. They want tactical information like how-to stuff. You know, how do I do this? How do I do that? How do I get in shape? How do I perfect this technique or whatever in martial arts? But any tactical stuff is pretty much useless unless you first have the mental foundation in place to be able to actually put that stuff into action. It's unbelievably common how many people will set out to do something, get motivated, you know, for like the initial period as they get into it, and it's almost like they feel like they've changed. They're like, oh yeah, I'm different and stuff like that now. But then inevitably the old self kind of catches up and they fall off again, and it isn't sustainable. And I would heavily suggest in the majority of cases that's because that person hasn't internally changed themselves and they haven't raised themselves to a new level. If you see any person who's super successful and study these people, they all had an incredibly clear vision of what they wanted to attain before they did it, because it's just so fucking hard to do something extraordinary. And if you haven't got that clear vision, that big like why pulling you forwards, then you cannot sustain the journey. You're just going to get bored when it gets hard and you're going to quit. And so the reason that that vision has to be so crystal clear and you really have to buy into it is because that then informs all of the different actions that you're going to take to be able to get there. You know, a murky vision is going to lead to half-assed results. So the more clear that you can get on what you actually want, then the easier it's actually going to be to get there. And people don't want to take the time to really think about this stuff. They just want to like take the actions because they're impatient. And so I always think about it like a navigation system that you use on your car. When you're entering the destination, you don't say, oh, I'd like to go somewhere close to like the supermarket, for instance. You write exactly where it is. The reason it has to be the exact place is because then it tells you exactly a perfect route to get there in the fastest time. That's very similar to how it is for us in like selecting a goal. If you just say, I would like to be in better shape, what does that really mean? It's not really clear. You know, being in better shape could be that you lose 1% body fat. Technically you are in better shape then, but it's not really going to show on your physique. And so having that clear vision is going to make it much easier to determine the type of actions you need to take. You know, if you go out for an occasion with your family or friends or something, and some like big hearty dessert is offered, you're going to be like, no, I have this vision, you know, that I want to attain. I know that like to get to this type of physique, and the clearer, like I said, it can be, the better. So I'm not going to partake in that food. And again, if you're not really bought into it and it's not crystal clear and you don't really believe you're going to be able to attain it, then you will just eat the cake. In the back of your mind, it's like, oh, I don't know if I can really achieve that anyway, so I may as well. And so to give you guys a story about my own experiences lately, like I've really decided that I just want to take my physique and training to just a completely new level. And to be quite honest, I think I'd gotten a little bit complacent with my training. And that might sound a bit crazy, like with you watching some of the things I do, but everyone will become complacent. Like there's always new levels of complacency wherever you get. Mine would just be of a higher level than somebody who's just starting, for instance, but it can still happen if you're not really on top of everything. And so my physique and stuff like that was always good by most people's standards, but I have always wanted it to be higher. And I was just kind of like going through the motions a lot with different things I was doing in training, you know, like not being the best I can be. And that I think does subconsciously affect you and can kind of make you a little bit frustrated with the process and stuff, until you can then again reconnect to that bigger vision for yourself. And so I think this is something that's really important for us to constantly review within ourselves as well. It's never just a one and done. You don't just select a vision and then that's it for the rest of your life, because as kind of goal-striving creatures, we're going to get to one thing and then we're going to want something else. If you don't then have a kind of higher vision once you get to something, then you will just kind of plateau and become complacent. And this kind of thing has happened for me quite a few different times in my own life, but I think before realizing it recently, I did it very unconsciously. I just kind of got excited about something and really went towards it and managed to achieve it, but then didn't really know what I'd done. And so that's where that complacency can set in. And so what happened with me recently was I think I'd just come across like some stuff that was really inspiring to me. I came across this guy who had watch training, and he was a real like absolute animal with his training and stuff, and it takes quite a lot for me to be inspired by people nowadays, and I'm always drawn to these people that are like just sickos basically, that love to just push the boundaries and go really far with their training and do more than most people think is possible, you could say. It just made me start to think like, what's possible for you to do? And when you do raise these standards for yourself, it's just a decision. It's not something that takes real time. It's like, it's how people can suddenly just like quit smoking or something like that. When they've just had enough of it, they just say, I'm like a non-smoker now. In that moment, they've just completely switched their identity. It really is a decision, because it brings something else out of you that you weren't able to access before. Before I decided that I was going to up my training, I'd do it just because I was so used to doing it and it was a habit, and I would always do it, which is better than doing nothing, of course. And it would feel difficult to do that because I wasn't really inspired. Like I said, I'd become a bit complacent, but lately I've been doing double and triple that amount, and it feels amazing because I've raised those standards for myself, and it brings more out of you. I've got the energy to like do more and feel better about it. And I'm trying my best to describe this in language that's understandable and makes sense, but at the risk of sounding like a hippie, which I am a little bit of a hippie, I guess, it's just a very magical process, and that's the best way I can really describe it. It's like, it's something that there aren't really words to describe properly. The universe has a very uncanny way of bending to your will and your dominant thought processes and assumptions, because when you connect to something so deeply, it's like you already have it, you already are it. It's just that reality hasn't caught up with you yet. And if you just keep walking the path, keep on that process, ignore the voices of doubt that will come, you will get to where you want to be. The analogy I've heard many times is that when a rocket is launched into space, it takes like a ton of energy to get it going, a ton of force to lift it from the Earth, but then as soon as it breaches the Earth's atmosphere, that's no longer needed anymore, and it just is able to move on its own, or whatever happens, I don't know. It's very similar with us. It's like it takes a bit of effort and energy to get going, and most people think that that's physical energy. They think it's discipline, and I personally don't believe in discipline. I don't actually believe in like forcing yourself to do something against your will, because that to me says that you're not connected to the vision enough. Because when something is very clear to you and you've almost just like made that internal switch, discipline isn't necessary. And people always say I'm very disciplined with like my training and stuff like that, but it's not discipline, it's easy. I just do it. It's because it's who I am. This is essentially what is called manifestation. And I know there is so much cringy manifestation content online and stuff like that, but the underlying principles behind it are very, very much true. And what I'm trying to really say is that this is a far more, not only effective, but easier process of attaining something, rather than like killing yourself just to get something. Because I've said this in other videos, but it's like, if you're trying to operate and do something from a state where you don't believe it and you don't see yourself as that person already, you've got no chance. If you imagine grabbing an elastic band and pulling it and pulling it and pulling it, that tension is kind of analogous to when we don't really believe something, but we're trying to force ourselves through action to do it. And eventually you're just going to let go of it, and it's going to snap back and hurt your hand, or it's just going to snap completely because there hasn't been a fundamental change. And that's why this is such a different process. And when I look back at my own life, every time I've made significant progress or gains in something, I've always done this, whether it's been unconsciously or consciously. And I've told the story before about when I was a kid and I got into martial arts. I honestly believe the most important thing that I ever did, although I didn't really know I was doing it at the time, was I just used to watch all of these martial art movies and people I was inspired by, and I just believed I was those people. And then I just went out and trained, and then it happened like that. You know, a lot of you might be watching this stuff if you haven't heard of this kind of thing before and be like, oh no, it was the training, look at all the stuff you do and things. And it's like, yeah, I do that stuff because I already believe I am that person. I don't do that stuff to become that person. And then everything sort of like catches up together. If you're dissatisfied with your current life, or it just feels a bit humdrum, you're not really inspired, even though you're just kind of going through the motions, raising your standards to that new level and embodying a new character is what you actually want. I think that a lot of these mental health problems that we have nowadays are some part of us within us knows that we're capable of more. And it will like quietly whisper to you at first, and then it will start to shout a little bit louder. And when we start to get things like depression and stuff, it's because we're not listening to that internal voice within us that's telling us to be better. Like before, you know, I was always in high level shape, but just not what I knew I could be capable of myself. And this is going to be individual for everybody. We're capable of so much more than we think we are, but that can only be brought out of you by having that internal change. You can't force it. It's almost like a limiter on a car. There's no amount of more physical energy you can push without making that mental, that internal change. And so I've said this thing before that got a little bit of flack on one of the videos, where I think when you really start to think about what you want, it's almost like you sign this metaphysical contract with the universe. You've decided you want something, and then every choice that you make after that is going to be informed by that decision. And if you're doing things down the wrong path, you're not going to feel good about them in a way that you might have been able to get away with before, because you now know that you're capable of more and nothing else is going to satisfy that. So that's what I meant by this is what you really want. It's like somewhere along the line you had a realization, whether you were conscious of it or not, that you could do more and you could be way better. A lot of these things are just not understood, and they're like, oh, take these medications to treat it and stuff, and it's just so misunderstood. Everything has a purpose. There's no mistakes in nature. You know, like these problems that we have signifies that there's something wrong. And I'm not talking about some corny clickbait like hustle harder, like get up at 5 a.m. and go running and stuff, again, because that stuff all comes from the premise of like no internal change, and without that you can't do anything else. You have to really get in touch with yourself to start with, and this is a much deeper understanding of this stuff than just those surface level videos. You've heard me kind of like complain about them before, but I do have a big problem with them because they're just operating from a false premise. True motivated people don't watch them, they just fucking do it. Get in touch with yourself and do it because it's like an act of what you really deserve. You're not doing it because you feel like a piece of shit if you're not like up at 5 a.m. hustling and trying to do all of this stuff. You do it because you know it's what you truly internally want. Living up to what you know you're capable of, and you can't lie to yourself. Trust me, like, you can sort of get away with it for a little bit of time, but it's going to cause problems in other areas of your life if you're not living up to who you know you can be. It's going to come out and express itself as things like bad habits. You might get some addictions. And so greatness in something, there is no quick fix to that. It just comes from mastering the fundamentals of your craft and showing up for years, if not decades, in order to do that. But really think about, what does it take to actually do that? You have to really fucking believe in that thing. You have to have something pulling you forward. It's not enough to just listen to somebody say that you should do it and try and do it. It's not going to happen that way. And that's why the majority of people don't really achieve anything outstanding, in my opinion. And people are always going to be filled with tons of excuses about why it's not possible for them, because they're too afraid to really look within and admit what they really want, because what that means is that they might have to completely shift their life around. I got a comment on the last video where somebody was like, oh, this is easy for you to do when you haven't got any responsibilities and children and stuff. And it's just like, keep telling yourself that, dude, you know, like, keep deceiving yourself. I just think it's kind of sad that people tell themselves these stories as an excuse not to be the best version of themselves and be happy. It's just self-deceit. It's not harming anybody other than the person saying it to say that stuff. Like, you're only harming yourself. So choose to be inspired by something. It is just a decision away. Like, when you start to see some of the results and the fruits of your labor, it becomes easier. Like that rocket analogy, getting into outer space, you'll start to see the results and you'll buy in harder, and then you start to just say almost like positive self-talk, affirmations to yourself when you're doing stuff. Like, I noticed today when I was training this morning, I'm saying these things in my mind like, oh, you're like a machine, you're just like a Terminator. Do you know what I mean? It sounds funny, but it's kind of like,
of course, I'm a Terminator.
That's become my new identity. These statements just come from that, and I'm just telling myself these things, and then it happens more and more, and then that makes me believe it even more, so I say more of these things. It's just a positive feedback loop, and it's the opposite of what happens when someone goes down and they start to lose self-esteem, they get addicted to things, they tell themselves they're a piece of shit, and then they go down. You've got to firstly just decide what you want, what kind of person you need to be to attain that, and then just heavily remind yourself of that every single day. Like, the first thing I do when I wake up very naturally now is just look at things that remind me of what I want to move towards, and it starts the day off right. It gets you into the right habits and stuff. And again, like I've already said, we're capable of so much more, but that will only be sort of activated and brought out of you by firstly getting in touch with what you really want. And it has to be what you really want, not what somebody tells you, not what your family or your culture expect and stuff. I mean, I hope this is inspiring to you guys. I don't know really what better way to describe it than what I've said. I don't know if the video really made sense. I feel like it did in my own mind, so you'll have to let me know what you think. But I'm going to end the video here just because I feel like it's gone on for ages. If you'd like to book coaching with me, guys, you can do that. You can join my Telegram where I post different content that I can't really share on YouTube. There's loads of different things on there, tutorials and stuff, and you can check that out. That's also linked in the description, and I will see you in the next video.